All right. Well, all of you, thank you very much for coming to the Sound Money Movement panel. I am Rhyno Coetsee. I'm a small business owner out of South Carolina. I am the new chair of C4SM, or Citizens for Sound Money. Today, I have the unenviable task of moderating in Jim Forsyth's shoes. In his stead, Jim suddenly passed away this week, and to honor him at the beginning of this presentation, I would just like for all of us to take a moment of silence and just reflect on his life and his legacy. So we will do that now. Thank you. Thank you very much. I want to speak just a few words on Jim's legacy. Jim had a superpower, and that superpower was building bridges, bringing people together of different interests, people with different motivations and approaches, and that made him a very unique glue within the sound money community, within the gold and silver space, and he was able to create what I think of as the genesis or the beginning of a movement. And so the term sound money movement is therefore sort of coming out of his vision and his motor. He had an incredible drive in the last 3 years. When we started C4SM in 2021, he quit a government job. He was working 20 hours a week. I mean, just sacrificed tremendously. And so he was a friend and mentor to me. I actually did not know much about sound money until I met Jim. And he had an incredible ability to be with whoever was in front of him. So from the standpoint of, he's a busy guy, but if you're in front of him, he was able to make you feel like you're the only person in the room. And so from that standpoint, that was just part of his superpower. So by starting C4SM and bringing all of these people together, Jim was able to create a movement, and we now have a variety of different people from different aspects of the sound money community, the digital side, the physical side, the alternative technology side, which we'll talk about all of those things. And so, as I just say this, Daniel and I had a hard time coming this week, and because things were really tough, but we felt that this was exactly where Jim wanted us to be. And so we are going to carry the torch forward. We're going to finish this race, and we're going to complete the movement that Jim started. So, thank you. So with that said, I'm just going to ask each of our participants to talk a little bit about themselves, where they're from, what their background is, what they feel like their area is, and then after that, we're sort of going to roll into defining the problem, which would be our first aspect of our conversation today. What is wrong?
Okay, thank you. I'll go ahead. My name is Mark Hilton. I'm the president and CEO of Alpine Gold Exchange. Alpine Gold is a service provider to the United Precious Metals Association, UPMA. It was established in 2012, so it's been around about a little more than a decade, and it followed on the heels of a legal tender act that was put in place in Utah in 2011. From within Alpine Gold, the genesis of the Goldback came out. So many of you are familiar with the Goldback. That was a innovation from Alpine Gold. It was spun off as a separate company, and we've since merged back again. So Alpine Gold is essentially a wholly owned subsidiary as a retail arm of Goldback Incorporated. My background, I've been doing this for about 3 years. I'm more of a engineer, technologist. I've been involved in a number of different industries. It was really my association with my brother, Larry Hilton, who authored that original bill and provides the trust and escrow services that we're based on. We'll talk more about solutions later, so I won't go too much into that. But I was drawn to it by really just the elegance of the system that was set up, the thought that went into it, and the important role that it plays to try to move liberty forward in the form of financial sovereignty. And so glad to be here. I really respect these gentlemen for coming during a difficult time. I did not know Jim personally, heard a lot about him, so it's a big loss to this movement. But we're going to keep pushing forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. My name is Daniel Diaz. I'm the Executive Director of Citizens for Sound Money. I'm a first-generation Cuban American, and I grew up hearing stories about how my family, they used to have businesses, land, wealth, and that was all taken away by the Fidel Castro and his regime. They literally went to the Havana airport and they confiscated everything, came to Miami with nothing but the clothes on their back. My grandfather had his family in a small studio in Miami, started pouring cement. He had a construction company in Cuba, started pouring cement for sidewalks in the 60s. Through the 70s, he worked himself up, bought the company, sold it in the 80s, retired, and left me and my family an inheritance. And that American dream is why I fight for freedom and liberty. I promised myself at the age of 16, I'll never allow what happened in my family's country to happen in my country. So since the age of 16, every decision I made, every job, everything was focused on preventing socialism and communism coming to the United States of America. I got involved in, I was a political consultant for 23 years. I took a sabbatical, got my master's, and while I was in getting my master's, I was an insurance agent. Later on, I became a stockbroker, and I hated the greed of Wall Street. Went back to politics, and then my business partner at the time during COVID told me, "Hey, you should invest in Bitcoin." I'm like, absolutely not. I learned about the fiat economic system. It's a whole tulip situation. I'm never going to invest in Bitcoin. This was like March of 2020 when Bitcoin was around $5,000. And yeah, I know. I'm kicking myself, man. So for months, my business partner's like, we got to invest. And then she tag teamed with my buddy who was also a Bitcoiner. And by September of 2020, I'm like, don't speak to me about Bitcoin. I'm never going to invest. And then Dan, who was my buddy, he's like, let me come over and show you 2 videos. And if you're not convinced of the power of Bitcoin, you never have to speak about it again. I didn't even need to watch the second video. The first video was a TED Talk by, what's his name? It was called The Blockchain Changing the World. I forget the speaker's name. But it wasn't the beginning. It wasn't all the technology. That was great. What really stood out to me was at the end of the talk, he talked about how 70% of the world's population had tenuous titles and deeds. They don't own their land. And he said, imagine if we put our deeds onto the blockchain. And when he said that, it snapped. I'm like, holy shit. If my family had blockchain technology in the 50s and we could prove on the blockchain that my family owned that land and those businesses, if the communist regime was ever overthrown, we could get our land and money back or get reparations. I'm like, blockchain technology can provide more economic, personal, and political freedom than any political activity of man. And I became a Bitcoiner then. October, I read as much as I could. I started mining Ethereum. Don't hate me for that. in November, and I started a crypto mining and blockchain consulting company in January of 2021. And then later on, we had the bull run, the bust, and this is how I met Marion and Jim. I started a gold-backed NFT project, and it was a learn to earn, where you would get Bitcoin and gold airdrop to you if you passed a quiz, if you learned financial literacy and sound money principles. So I reached out to Marion about 2 or 3 times because nobody responded. And finally, Jim's like, yeah, let's have a meeting. And that's how I met Jim. And I think my interview and my story about Cuba related to Jim's experience with the Soviet Union. And I think my story of traveling 36 hours nonstop. I bought a car in Utah. Marion scheduled our interview the next day, and I didn't sleep. I was hallucinating by Georgia. I don't know how I got home. And then I gave the interview. We heard about the Texas bill. I volunteered my connections because I was a political consultant for 23 years. And Jim and Marion were so impressed with my connections, they offered me a contracting gig with Rhyno. I was a legislative director fundraiser, and then later we transitioned and I became executive director. And that's my story about how I met Jim and my life in the movement. So thank you.
Hello, my name is Patrick Holland, and I founded an organization in Missouri. It's a little ways from here. It's called the Missouri Freedom Initiative. And I'd like to talk about the etymology of the group here real quick because it's exciting. We're into gold and silver, of course, but where we started was something called the Second Amendment Preservation Act. And I know that some of you probably have heard that before, but you may not be aware of how Missouri did it. So Missouri is the only state in the United States that does not follow federal gun law. In fact, it's illegal to do so, and there is a $50,000 fine if you should enforce a federal gun law, and that includes political subdivisions. That's what we've accomplished in Missouri. Now, my group came in to help out with an effort that started 6 years before we came in. But we provided an awful lot of manpower, grassroots, to actually help get that done legislatively, signed by the governor. And of course, it has been overturned by the Eighth Circuit, but Justices Kavanaugh and Thomas said the $50,000 fine remains. SEPA is still right now overturned. We're waiting for the Eighth Circuit to get done, but we're ready to go to the Supreme Court. We already know what the Supreme Court's going to say. But that was how we started. And when we were getting really close to the finish line with the Second Amendment Preservation Act, we decided as a group we were going for sound money legislation, which we call the Constitutional Money Act. So in Missouri, we have 6 bills currently in our legislature, which is still going on. We have 2 more months to go that we're trying to get over the finish line. Very exciting legislation that covers everything from legal tender law to anti-confiscation, getting rid of the capital gains tax we have in the state of Missouri, but also allowing for the Treasury to be able to have at least 1% of the state's reserves in gold and silver. Yeah, that sounds like a funny number, 1%. That's not much, is it? At least 1%. Sometimes you have to compromise a little bit to work with all the politicians there. But recently, Daniel and Jim actually came to Missouri and helped us out with a House hearing. And the help was tremendous, actually. It helped a great deal. We're not done yet. We still have 2 more months of the legislative session. If anyone knows anything about how these things happen in Missouri, they're usually done in the last week of the legislative session. That's when almost every bill finally gets through. So we have time to get it done. We have setbacks every year. You know that this is the second year we've tried to do this. And actually, the fact that we didn't get over the finish line last year is a funny story. I'm not going to get into it right now, but also too, I do everything I can to help out other states. I've helped with Arkansas, I've helped with Tennessee, Mississippi, and many other states too, to try and get legislation not only filed but supported, and of course across the finish line. So that's what the Missouri Freedom Initiative is currently working on right now. And that is our single goal right now, is to get legal tender legislation and gold and silver reinstated as money in the state of Missouri, not to replace the dollar, but to run alongside it, like happens in many countries around the world where 2 currencies are running side by side. I'm sure many of you know this. So this is part of what we're doing. And of course, meeting with Daniel and Jim, and it was just 2 weeks ago, Jim was in Missouri. And so I'll probably share some stories about that later, but Daniel and Jim came in at their own expense to help Missouri with our legislation, and they really made an impact. So the partnership I'm forming with Citizens for Sound Money makes sense, not only for them to help me, but for me to help them. And so that's a big part of my story, but I'll go ahead and pass the microphone.
Hi, my name is Aaron Day. I'm a serial entrepreneur. When my second business was destroyed by Obamacare and Dodd-Frank, I became a hardcore 100% liberty activist. I moved to New Hampshire as part of the Free State Project in 2009 and served in a variety of political capacities, running super PACs, running other political organizations, helping to get candidates elected, ran for a number of offices myself, gave up on politics in 2008, and got entirely into crypto. So I was introduced to Bitcoin in 2012. In fact, I remember at a Liberty Forum, I believe in 2013, used the first ever Bitcoin ATM in the room over there. In 2019, I exited fiat completely, so I've been living off of crypto, gold, and silver since 2019. And after COVID happened, I started looking at what was going on with COVID tyranny. I started investigating what was going on with the crackdown on crypto because I was seeing some of my friends being thrown into federal prison, having their businesses destroyed. And I realized that all of this was happening to make way for CBDC, central bank digital currency, and that CBDCs are much closer than we think. I think there's an actual chance that we could see CBDCs before this election, which I'll talk about later. So I have basically dedicated my life and put everything on hold to fight CBDCs. I ran for president of the United States to bring awareness to this issue. You probably didn't hear about that. I'm now at the Brownstone Institute as a fellow. I wrote this book, The Final Countdown, and I am going around the country giving 4-hour workshops, teaching people about the threat and introducing them when they walk out of the workshop to self-custody, crypto, gold, and silver. I've known Jim since 2012 and have been talking to Jim about what I'm doing, and in fact, he and I were partnering together on the silver and gold aspect of this. So,
all right. Thank you very much, Aaron. So before you talk about solutions in life, it's always very important to define the problem. So if you don't understand the problem, really you can't come up with a quality solution. So we're going to start now and just sort of run through 5 different aspects of the problem we're dealing with. And the first one is to Mark. And just, Mark, define to us what you see the problem from a macro standpoint with the current financial system.
Yeah, I think I like to look back at history and see what's happened to financial systems over time. Where might we be heading as an indicator? And you think about going back to ancient Greece, right? They started with sound money. They were the first ones to mint a coin that had the sovereign's face planted on it, and pretty quick people kind of got tired of carrying around these things, so they started doing receipts. They would keep their money in a vault, get a receipt, and pretty soon that receipt was an IOU. You could give it to somebody else, and it just meant I can get gold out of the vault. So that became the thing, and then the folks that were managing the vault realized, hey, nobody's coming back for this stuff. Maybe I can use it. And so fractional reserve was born, and they started making money off of that. So if everybody went back, the gold was not there. It was loaned out to somebody else. So that was the next step. And then after that, you have the move all the way to fiat, which is like, you know what, we can just tell people it's in there. We don't actually need anything in the vault. And they'll just use these pieces of paper because we'll tell them it's worth something. And that's essentially what happened in ancient Greece, which led to a money supply expansion, the devaluation, the debasement of that currency, and economic collapse. And that has happened dozens and dozens of times throughout history. So where are we? If you look in that cycle, we are in the fiat stage of that. We were off the gold standard, we're into fiat. And if you think about what are some of the issues, well, we have a debt now. Money is debt. The only way you can get money now is by creating debt. So if all the debt disappeared, there'd be no money left. So there's this massive expansion that can happen. It's in the hands of the political folks who have other alternative motives. So we end up with this scenario where we're getting too much expansion, similar to either coin clipping or what has been done in other cultures. The interest on our debt is now becoming unsustainable. As inflation increases, you want to increase the price of capital, which then just increases the price of the debt that's already out there. So you get this sort of snowball effect that's occurring. And everybody I've talked to say this is not sustainable. We cannot really fight inflation effectively because we can't charge enough to dampen it because the government can't afford it based on the debt that we have. So it's this sort of cycle that could lead to economic collapse. And so we're here to talk about solutions, but this is kind of the scenario that we're in, and it's really based on historical context. We tend to think, well, in the last 50 years it's been so-and-so. Think about the last 5,000 years. And what has always worked in that case? Precious metals. That's sound money. They didn't have crypto. They didn't have certain technologies, so we'll talk about that. And I think we'll have maybe slightly different opinions on the solution, but I think we'll probably all agree on the problem.
Yep. Thank you, Mark. And then I always have the saying is we need to make money again. And so I want to ask Daniel about the differences between the concept of currency and money and how to break those concepts down.
Yeah. Thank you, Rhyno. Just by a show of hands, how many of you know why gold and silver is called sound money? Okay, a few. So sound money, back in the day, to check on the purity, you'd actually drop a gold or silver coin on the ground or a table and listen to the frequency. And that's why it's called sound money. In fact, you can download an app on your phone to listen to the frequency and tell you how pure it is. So that's why. In fact, there's a movie, The Pianist. Remember the Jewish pianist? There's a scene where he's playing in a restaurant, and the guy's like, he finished it up, and then you hear the guy dropping gold and silver on the table listening in World War II. So that's why it's called sound money. But what is money? So we think money is the U.S. dollar. No, that's not the case. Mike Maloney, Jim pointed me to, I said, hey, teach me as much about sound money. He said, go watch Hidden Secrets of Money. And that's where I got a lot of my education in the beginning. And then I read like 13 books last year and got a really good education on it. But money, Mike Maloney has like 7 characteristics. But overall, the industry recognizes 3 characteristics of money. You have a medium of exchange, which the dollar and euro and all that is. You exchange it for goods and services. It's a unit account, $1, 100 pennies, 4 quarters. But that is what currency is. It's a unit account and medium of exchange. What it is not, currency is not a store of value. Why? Well, I gave this example in Missouri and in other states when I testify. In January of 2020, we had $20 trillion in debt before COVID. Then the stimulus package happened with Trump, and then stimulus again with Biden. And today, we stand at $34.4 trillion. That's $14.4 trillion in 4 years. Divide that by 20. That's almost 72% inflation. Divide that by 4. I don't give a shit what the Fed says. Inflation's not 3%. It's closer to 18% a year. And that's why we're suffering. Because it's not money. They're stealing. When they print $1 trillion in 100 days, they're stealing money right out of our pockets. And gold and silver has maintained its value for millennia. I use this example. In 120 years ago, in 1904, a $20 bill could buy you an ounce of gold. What could you buy with $20 in 120 years ago? You buy a top hat, shirt, tuxedo, shoes, a pocket watch, flowers, and chocolates for your date. What can you buy for $20 a day? Maybe chocolates, right? But what can you buy with an ounce of gold? If I wanted to, today at almost $2,200, I could buy a top hat, pocket watch, tuxedo, shirt, shoes, chocolates, and flowers for my date. Because gold and silver maintains its value. Printing currency does not. And that's the main difference. The main characteristic that makes currency and money different is the store of value over a long period of time.
Awesome. Thank you, Daniel. Awesome examples there. Patrick, so tell us a little bit, practically speaking, Daniel kind of touched on inflation a little bit, but what are some of the unintended consequences of money printing for our society and for the different classes and things of that nature?
Sure. Okay. Unintended consequences. Okay. Mark just spoke a little bit ago very eloquently about the big picture. But in my mind, the big picture is made up of lots of tiny little pictures. Daniel said something very important here. He was talking about how much debt we've incurred in the last 4 years. One thing Daniel didn't talk about has to do with M1 and M2, is that $14 trillion is going to get fractionally reserved through the commercial banking system. It doesn't stop at $14 trillion. That's why it always takes a little bit longer for inflation to hit when the federal government prints it. So what is the federal government doing? The Federal Reserve. They're sucking some of this money out of the system while they're incurring new debt at the same time. I don't know that we've ever done this before in history, but once again, it's a giant experiment right now anyway. So let's talk about, I guess, the little pictures that make up the big picture. We know that a lot of folks cannot move out of mom and dad's house. So we've got multi-generational homes happening in America right now. When in communism, you expect that. It is the way of things in a communist nation. So we're starting to embrace that here as well, and that is a direct result of money printing. Now, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying it's new in the American experience to have homes with 3 generations living in them, and it's because of money printing. We can speak about that openly, I think. But there are many other things. Consider this. Consider the nutrition that people get today because they can't afford proper food. What they do because they don't have enough money for what they used to buy 4 or 5 years ago at the grocery store, They're just buying calories now. And this is going to cause medical problems, which is going to exacerbate the problem in the medical community caused by the big picture problem Mark eloquently told us about anyway, with the government meddling in the medical system here in the United States of America to begin with. There's all kinds of other pictures I can think of right now, but I think, hitting on those two first and foremost, but the fractional reserving of $14 trillion, I don't know when we're really going to start seeing the effects of that, but I think we're already in it. When you're actually, and this is once again, from my perspective, we're in the middle of this thing right now. We don't know what it looks like at the end yet. We don't know how bad things are going to get. We certainly don't know when it will end. But I'll tell you what, sound money is the solution. Now, there might be other solutions associated with sound money, but the federal government and the Federal Reserve cannot print up gold and silver. So for the tiny pictures that make up the big picture, I think as far as the solution goes, silver and gold have a role to play as they have through 5,000 years of human history. And it's time for us to embrace it again, just like for some reason we're having to embrace 3 generations in the same home. We need to go back to our roots of gold and silver.
Awesome. That is awesome explanation. Thanks so much. All right, so Aaron, we want to kind of discuss the threat of CBDCs. We hear it in the news all the time. And just kind of elaborate to us. You've shared some stats with me on what's going out there and what you're hearing and what you're seeing.
Sure. Well, CBDCs were interestingly a reaction to Bitcoin. So Bitcoin was launched in the 2008-2009 timeframe. Governments and central banks looked at this and said, hey, this is a threat, so we're going to implement our own form of digital currency that we can control and program centrally. And what's frightening about this is in 2020, there were 30 countries just researching CBDCs. Today, there are 130 countries researching or deploying central bank digital currencies. There are 1.3 billion CBDC accounts globally, which is more than twice the number of cryptocurrency accounts. It's actually leapfrogged cryptocurrency. More alarmingly is most people think that this is a pipe dream or something that's not going to happen anytime soon in the United States. There have been 3 successful CBDC pilots that have already been completed in the United States. The one that replaces cash was done between 2020 and 2022. It has 20 times the transaction capacity of the traditional financial system. When they completed the pilot, they said that the technology works, we just need to figure out the marketing and the legality of it. We currently are under Executive Order 14067, which Biden signed on March the 9th, 2022, which authorizes the exploration of a CBDC while simultaneously taking a whole-of-government approach to cracking down on cryptocurrency, which anybody that's in cryptocurrency knows that has been absolutely going on with full steam. So now we know the president is looking towards it. The technology already exists. How would something like this be implemented? Well, let's look at how we get this type of large, massive legislation. We got the Patriot Act 45 days after 9/11. We got TARP 18 days after Lehman Brothers collapsed. And we got the $2.2 trillion CARES Act 16 days after COVID was declared a pandemic. The way that you would implement something like CBDC is actually pretty easy using this problem, reaction, solution model. If you have a terrorist attack or a cyber attack, it'll create a fearful situation, and Republicans and Democrats will come together because we have to usher in CBDC to stop terrorism and money laundering. That's how we could get a CBDC before the 2024 election.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Aaron. I wanted just to add sort of a global statement about education. And part of the challenge with our current population is most of the people here understand what we just talked about, and it's just this educational piece, and that's become such a large part of our way of life, and so we really, as a part of the problem, actually need to find creative ways to articulate this to people so they can grasp it. There's so much terminology in finance, whether it's CBDCs, things of that nature. You ask somebody, why does inflation occur? Why does it exist? They know it hurts them, but they can't quite make the connection between paper money printing and inflation. So for us, it's just a mandate, sort of what Tulsi said this morning. Every one of us has a circle of influence. We have our neighbors, we have our coworkers. And that's a big part of what C4SM does, is we're trying to, of course, advocate for sound money, and then also advocate for financial literacy, which is another aspect of sound money. I mean, you could have lots of sound money, but if you're a terrible spender and you don't keep up with your debt, then you might still have nothing. So it's just the two aspects of that that we need to become better at educating our population. Okay, so that all sounds really like some really tough news, and but now we want to talk a little bit about solutions. A lot of the solutions we want to talk about today are what I consider next-gen solutions. They are solutions from, let's say, maybe the last 20 years that have completely shifted the paradigm on sound money, and therefore the need for new legislation on the state level, which is what the sound money movement's all about, is how do we impact sound money on a state level versus a federal level and grow from the small to the big. So I'll start with Mark, and he'll go with that.
Great, thank you. So yeah, solutions. I think we all have maybe a different approach here. Our focus is, given that we've seen a lot of the attack on things that are a little bit considered fringe, if you will, things the government doesn't like, they will come after you with a vengeance. And we've seen people be taken down. And so our strategy has always been, let's just leverage the laws that are in place. Let's use the money that the government actually provides us, called legal tender, which is gold and silver that they print in the U.S. Mint, that people just kind of collect for fun. That is money, and that is defined as money, and therefore its legal tender can't be taxed for capital gains if you use it to spend. There's a bunch of benefits of actually using legal tender. So that's been our focus, is provide a system. Ideally, we'd love, as a solution, just go back to Congress and say, please put that gold standard back in. Let's just, tie the hands of all the politicians. You can't buy votes anymore. We're just going to be back to a sound system. Is that likely to happen anytime soon? No, right? So, I recently talked with a gentleman named G. Edward Griffin, who wrote this seminal book, The Creature from Jekyll Island. Talked about the Fed and so forth. Fantastic book. Pretty long, but if you're up for it, I would recommend that. He heard one of my podcasts, and previously he had heard about the gold back. We'd told him what we were doing, and he didn't really get it, didn't buy into it. He called me up and said, the light went on. I get what you guys are doing. I love it. In his book, he talks about how to get back on the gold standard, but he even admits that that's very unlikely, and certainly in his lifetime, and he's 92 years old. But he's like, he was trying to do something, and he saw what we're doing. Is like, this is what I really want to get behind. So he's really endorsing what we're doing. But basically, we're trying to be like a bank, but not a bank. So we're providing a lot of the same services that you can get. Goldback is just part of that. I've got my wallet here. I can pull out a Goldback. I got it with this other paper stuff too. And this one's going to last. It's going to have value. So this is money and this is currency, right? As Daniel explained, that's just one component. So basically people can have an account, like an online account, like you're used to a bank. You can have, you buy gold coins. We don't just pile up gold bars, because if you spend gold bars, the IRS can come after you for capital gains. If you spend legal tender gold, they cannot. All right, so that's a huge insight that came to us when we set up the system. We're using legal tender. So if you go into our vault, where all these accounts are backed, we have like $100 million of gold and silver, eagles, buffaloes, and so forth. That's all we have. We do have some gold backs. They're convertible into gold and silver eagles. Therefore, they're legal tender instruments, and they benefit from the same benefits from legal tender. So we offer that. We provide, like a bank, a savings opportunity where you can have storage. Unlike a bank, we have 100% reserves, so there's no fractional reserve. We're not regulated like a bank. We use a trust escrow platform, which allows us to keep privacy. There's no reporting of what balances are. It's like a Swiss bank account, sort of. And we also provide a means to get a return. So we have a lease program, which is kind of unique, that you can actually you can grow the amount of gold that you have. Rather than just working really hard and converting the paper stuff into gold and then stacking it in a dark corner, you can actually put it to use and get a return currently up to 3.5% in gold, which is a real return. If you add 18% of it, which is to protect yourself from hedging, that's like an over 20% return equivalent in the stock market, which is a risky investment. So it's kind of a complete solution we try to provide. Goldbacks is a cash replacement essentially, but we do have a digital element. You can also have a credit card that's tied to your account, or it's a debit card actually, and it just gets loaded as you need it. So, and then we're also building a network of merchants that accept gold and gold backs and so forth as legal tender. So it's trying to build this ecosystem that really allows it to sit alongside the traditional banking rails, but have interfaces into it where you need it, because we have to live our lives. If we want to live in a commune and just trade amongst ourselves, the gold back will do it. And some people are considering that and probably will do that. But most of us live in an environment where we got to spend money. We need a credit card or something, but it's a short term. We load it as you need it. You spend it. And you can even borrow against your assets, so you pay no capital gains. The best thing is actually spend it as gold and silver. Get somebody who will accept it that way, and it is treated just like any cash transaction. So anyway, that's our approach. We're going to be talking more about this. If you're interested in digging in a little more, at the boardroom down at the end of the hall, there's a Constitution made of gold. In that little room, for those right after this, we're going to be chatting down there with some other folks.
Yeah. I just used the goldbacks to pay for my haircut the other day.
Yeah! They did a good job, clearly. Yeah.
Awesome. Daniel, can you please talk to us a little bit about digital solutions, specifically asset-backed digital currencies?
Absolutely. So I came into the sound money movement through Bitcoin. I told you that story. And then I learned about PAX-G and Tether Gold, which are asset-backed digital currencies. But Jim had a very specific definition. Even though PAX-G and Tether Gold are backed by gold, to redeem it, you need to have 400 ounces, which is like close to $1 million now. That's not practical. So we coined the term with Jim, Marion, and I think there was another person involved. Nathan coined asset-backed digital currencies versus ABDC versus CBDC, right? And what makes it different is it's redeemable at smaller quantities. So there's 4 main companies that we work with as a coalition. There's Kinesis, money system. There's Load, it's a decentralized gold and silver system. There's Glint, which isn't a digital asset. It's more of a traditional. They have gold and they use a database to transfer the ownership. And then there's Oris, which is a European asset-backed digital currency company. So we used. Let me back up. Part of the reason why Marion and Jim liked me was I kind of jumped into this gold and silver thing from Bitcoin, and it's easier, I find, for Web3 and blockchain advocates to jump into gold and silver than it is for gold bugs and silver stackers to get into the Bitcoin, right? Anybody get that experience too? Yeah. So I think it's a novel idea to bring the blockchain and fractionalize and tokenize real assets. I mean, it isn't just gold and silver. We focus on gold and silver because the U.S. Constitution states in Article 1, Section 10, Clause 1, that states can only make gold and silver coin tender for the payment of debts. That's why we're doing this whole sound money movement, changing the country state by changing the country state by state. So these solutions are fantastic, right? Anybody know what Gresham's Law is? Yeah, some. So Gresham's Law, for those that don't know, is that it says bad money drives out good money. What do I mean by that? So in the 60s, I think it was 62, they stopped making the 64. They stopped making the silver quarters. And what did you notice? People started pulling out the silver, and the bad money stayed out. Bad money drove out good money, and that's how the system works. So how do we reverse that? How do we get people to spend gold? How do we get people to spend, not bad money? Well, there's a whole yield system, like with the Kinesis monetary system. Same thing with Oris. not so much Glint, but also Load. So Load, what's funny is actually I just realized this, the blockchains have an incentive for you to keep and spend it, because as you spend your gold and silver, there's a small fraction of a fee for sending money. It's Pax G also. You pay between 22 to 100 basis points for transacting, swiping your card. And that, by owning either the main token, they each have their own like cryptocurrency, where every month you receive a yield in gold and silver based on how much you spend, how much you have saving. If you minted in the actual mint to put more gold in the system, you actually get a yield from that. So that actually incentivizes people to spend their real money, so that they can continue making yields. For instance, in the Kinesis, Load, and Oris, the more gold and silver you have in the system, it's called the holder's yield, you receive more rewards. And that is kind of the solution to get to reverse Gresham's law. In fact, the 10th Amendment Center wrote multiple articles. We'll get into that next question, but we're working with multiple organizations and trying to pass asset-backed digital currencies, and they highlighted multiple times in each of the states that we got legislation filed that this is a way to reverse Gresham's law, to incentivize the spending of gold and silver. Because traditionally, for instance, Glint, though it is digital, it's not an asset, you have to pay a storage fee, right? You put gold in a vault, they need to make money to service it, you pay a fee. That's not, sure, I like the fact that you have a debit card. They're only one of those 4 companies that have a debit card in the United States that you can spend. I actually have it in my pocket. I can buy all of us coffee or whatever and with gold. And it sells the gold and pays it in fiat, right? But there's another way to get around it. Rhyno, he has a business in South Carolina. He has an organic farm, and he incentivizes people to, instead of paying him in fiat, if they pay him in Kinesis Pay, gold and silver, he has a 10% discount on all the produce that that the people buy. So this system is not fighting against the Federal Reserve System. It's an optional system to opt into real money. So it runs parallel with the Federal Reserve. So, and I know on Goldback's website, so for example, digitizing it makes it like functional. I can buy a 10 cent or 50 cent or whatever piece of gum is these days with inflation, who knows, but less than the smallest Goldback, which is 1,000th ounce, which is about $4.50, 70 cents, depending on the price of gold. Well, with a debit card, you can spend and buy the smallest amount. And some people might not be able to save in an ounce of gold or multiple ounces of silver, but you can buy as little as $5 with digital gold and silver and putting into saving your money. So part of the systems that we're trying to do is, if regional banks are okay with it, accepting digital currencies, there's neobanks where you can actually, like I have a neobank called Juno. I put my dirty money, fiat, in there, and then I turn it into cryptocurrency, and then I swap it out for these gold and silver coins. And that's great. These are friendly banks. Not all banks are friendly, as you'll learn when we talk about our legislative efforts. But there are a lot of solutions out there. Those are just 4 companies. There's more. Citizens Without Money, we have our YouTube channel. We've interviewed a lot of these companies. There's like One Gold, which is like Glint. There's a bunch of other companies that have a database system versus a digital asset system. But these are all solutions to break us free of this enslavement of the fiat economic system.
Awesome. Thank you, Daniel. Aaron, talk to us a little bit about physical possession and self-custody.
Sure. This is a key point that I want to drive home. One thing to keep in mind is every fiat currency in human history has failed. So I think that if you look at what's going on historically with the dollar, we are checking every box of a fiat currency that is in actually the late stages of collapse. So what I am doing when I go around the country and introducing people to crypto, gold, and silver, I am emphasizing and focusing on the importance of self-custody. So with respect to crypto, what self-custody means is not a BlackRock ETF, by the way, which I think is a backdoor confiscation mechanism. It's also not keeping crypto on an exchange. You need to have your crypto in your own wallet, in your own possession, so that you can use it without any third party in the middle. And then for the purpose of my workshops, what I'm doing is I actually give people a gold back and I give people silver just to, acquaint them with the concept of self-custody. Most of my audience is actually the opposite of a free state audience. These are usually people with no crypto experience, and even with respect to precious metals, they're always using it with a third party. So for me, the important thing about working with people directly is making sure that they tangibly either physically have precious metals in their hands or have a self-custody crypto wallet.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. I think so we sort of summarized for you guys the reasons why new legislation is required. A lot of the legislation that we're doing has to do with reinforcing legal tender, allowing an electronic component. So some of these systems that Daniel was talking about, states would actually partner with a vendor and create a parallel state system for their citizens. And, we're talking to states, and a lot of them are concerned about their citizens, especially the healthy states. Like you think about a state like Florida, they're financially healthy. And so for them, they're sort of trying to hedge that position that they've worked really hard to get to. So states are very interested. They're all very concerned about the end game. Like we all know what the end game is. It's just a matter of when. And so my other encouragement to you is it's like a toolbox, right? It's a good idea to have a variety of different tools. Sometimes you need a hammer, and all you've got is a screwdriver. Each of these concepts that we've discussed has pros and cons. Some of them have third-party risk, so that's where you're part of a centralized company, let's say, that runs something for you. Others have what I call intra-party risk. That means if you lose your keys, that's it, it's gone. So, that's why 3 million Bitcoin is missing. So there's pros and cons to all of them. I like to think of it as a diversified approach. And so for all of you guys, don't get pigeonholed into one solution. Try to expand and just try different things out. I mean, I today have learned a bunch of things I didn't quite fully understand or didn't grasp. So there's just a lot to this. And we just thank you for coming. And we do want to ask if there's any questions for any of the panelists now, if we have time. We can roll into that. I think we have a few more minutes.
Do you want to talk about the legislation a little bit?
Yes, I think that's a great idea. Yeah, Daniel, break that down.
Well, I'll let Pat go about what's going on in Missouri and the states that he's working with, and then I'll touch on what we've done in New Hampshire with Representative Amon. You guys should give him a round of applause. He is the one that sponsored the Sound Money Act in New Hampshire.
Okay. First off, I'm going to ask you, how many of you guys think that the federal government's going to come up with a solution for inflation? Just raise your hand real quick. Okay. Oh, okay, they have a solution. It's a central bank digital currency. It's total enslavement, right? So Thomas Massey put forth, legislation just a couple of months ago to do so. Eric Burleson co-sponsored. He's my representative. And it was nice to see that, but it is totally futile. Now, let me tell you why it's so hard to get legislation like this done in states. And I'm here representing Missouri, but I've worked with other states, too, to get this very legislation done. It's because the states are tethered to the federal government by their budgets. So this is the reason why they're less likely to do something that may be considered offensive to the federal government, right? But if you get enough people in your state to say this is what we want, and by the way, it's in the Constitution, Article 1, Section 10, look it up. By the way, I do, and I'm not going to give names, but there are several legislators in several states that I've had to show that to because they didn't know about that. These are the same guys who actually swear an oath, by the way. But it's okay. As grassroots, if you're not educating your legislators, you're not doing your job. But I guess my main point with this is the states are the solution. It is not the federal government. They are not the solution. They never will be the solution. They created the problem in the first place. Daniel talked about the $14 trillion in the last 4 years. $14 trillion. And it's not done being fractionally reserved yet. This inflation is not going away. Biden's lying about that, by the way. Shh.
No, you say.
So, but the legislation that we do in states is critical. Let me give you an update on Missouri. In less than 2 weeks, we will have Senator Bill Eigel's SB 735, one of the most comprehensive sound money legislation, in fact, if not the most comprehensive sound money legislation ever seen before by a single state. It'll be on the floor of the Senate. Now, we're very fortunate in that the 10th Amendment Center actually follows our work and actually reports on this stuff. So, look, you could see it there. Also, our website, mofree.org. But this is pivotal, and other states need to follow in these footsteps. They need to work this. Oh, that's right. There's 26 states doing that this year. 26 states are working towards gold and silver, just like it said in the Constitution, Article 1, Section 10. Missouri is not necessarily a trailblazer. We're running behind. There's 5 other states that have gotten this done before. But there needs to be more. So if you're from New Hampshire, you've got great legislation here to support. But if you're from another state, make sure your state is running legislation as well. And if your legislative session is almost over for the year, then do it next year. Get it done. It's more important than you can imagine. We're talking about the end of the dollar here, gang. This is a paradigm shift that I don't think any of us are mentally or psychologically prepared for, and it will affect everyone in the world. But just remember, America is ground zero for that economic devastation that is coming. It is us that will be hurting the most as we march right into a central bank digital currency. And remember, the people get to choose what is money, and the Constitution says it's gold and silver.
Amen. All right, I'll wrap it up with the legislative side. I just want to say, so Jim this past weekend gave a State of the Organization address, and he started off saying that the sound money movement isn't C4SM, it isn't him, it isn't me, it is we the people who want to have sound markets, because without sound money, there are no sound markets. And Jim had such a passion for the sound money movement. He's been in it since I think 2006 with Ron Paul. And he read End the Fed, and that's it. The rest is history. And he's touched so many people around the world. In fact, Representative Amon shared with me that he actually helped work on Jim's Senate campaign when they first got here in the state. And that is kind of what Jim has dedicated the latter part of his life. He dedicated his entire life to the sound money movement. Like the founding fathers, when they signed the Declaration of Independence, their entire wealth, their entire being, their entire life, they knew once they signed that document that if they lost the war, they would be hung. And Jim dedicated his entire being to the sound money movement. I loved lobbying with him. We came first in New Hampshire because it's a state where he was a state senator. We met with Representative Amon at a restaurant downtown and showed him our draft legislation, which was pretty rough back then. And we've modified it a lot since then. And then we went to South Carolina. Then we went to Florida. Then we learned about Texas, and we helped out in Texas. Then Missouri. Then we learned about this guy right here. He thought he was alone. We thought we were alone. Then we heard about these guys in Texas coming to our territory, Florida. I'm like, who the hell's putting legislation in Florida without telling me? Like, let's find out who these guys are. I'm like, okay, we found the sponsor, and we learned about them, and they thought they were alone. The sound money movement is alive and well and strong. And Jim was able to go to the economic war room with Kevin Freeman. He has a book. We handed this to every legislator, not in Missouri, but definitely in Florida. It's called Pirate Money, How to Defeat the Great Reset. It's available on Amazon. Kevin Freeman has a TV show called Economic War Room. It's fantastic, and it's a lot like Aaron's book as well about CBDCs, and then gold being the solution. And going state by state, talking to legislator by legislator, there's a few common threads. Even though we're in about 25, 26 states, only 18 have filed legislation. The other states, we were trying to get them to push it through. There wasn't enough time to miss a deadline. But we're still working with them for next legislative session. And for example, in Florida and in Utah, we didn't get it through. We had the votes, but the common thread with Utah and Florida and kind of in Missouri, it isn't that we didn't have the votes, right? We knew if we had the bill heard in Florida, it was going to get through. We had the Speaker of the House. We had almost every single Republican. We have a supermajority in Florida, like 77% of the legislature. We don't even need to talk to Democrats, but we got Democrats on board as well. The problem was petty political bullshit from leadership, because the Senate president killed almost every single conservative bill this last session and would not even give us the time of day to let it be heard. And every time we thought the bill was dead, I would call Jim like, God damn it, Jim, they're killing it. Well, hold on, Dan. I thought the medical marijuana bill and the school credit bill was dead. Let's talk it through. Let's work it out. And he's like, all right. He calmed me down. We went and worked it. We brought it back. The Florida bill was like a black cat on Halloween. It had like more than 9 lives because it died and it came back. It died and came back. And that's what Jim was like. Jim was go, 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 don't give up, build bridges, find solutions. He was a great senator. And in a 2-year period, I was talking to Jason Osborne, the majority leader of the House here, and he couldn't believe that he was only a 2-term senator because of the amount of legislation. And that speaks to the character and the type of person he was. I'm going to close with this. When we came up here with Keith Amon, I was learning who my boss was. And we were talking, I was listening, I was watching him, and I realized something about Jim. He is one of the most principled men that I've ever had the pleasure of meeting and working with. And I told him, you can be the next Ron Paul. We were drinking beer at his son's house. And I said, dude, you're the most principled man I have seen. You are a statesman. And I see how you work, you talk to the Jason, you talk to Keith, you talk to all these legislators, the Secretary of State. Dude, I'm gonna run your campaign for Congress, and we're gonna make you the next damn Ron Paul of the United States of America. And he's like, no. And then he started thinking, he looked down with his glasses, a little chuckle. Maybe, yeah. And that's his legacy, man. He is the founding father of the Sound Money movement. And we are going to carry his torch of freedom throughout the entire country and the world to bring sound money back and to free us of the chains and enslavement of the fiat economic system.
Yeah.
They do have their own private bank. They were on our short list, but there's not enough people in the movement yet to hit every single state. We targeted states that we already had relationships with, and that we could start moving legislation through. There's literally only me and Rhyno right now in operations of Citizen Sound Money. Patrick, who is completely unfunded.
It's on the list. It's for 2025. I think we should see some very strong legislation filed in North Dakota in 2025.
Yeah. What fuels your movement to get out there and do what you guys do? Yeah, so we've been blessed in the beginning of our organization to do some fundraising through programmatic sales, but since we started actually lobbying, we relied on a lot of donations. So you can go to soundmoney.org, click on donate, and you can donate to Citizen Sound Money. We're going to use all that money to finance our lobbying efforts across the country. For example, he doesn't even have an organization. It's just one man with grassroots. And the Missouri Freedom Initiative, we donated 200 goldbacks. We flew him out here. We're helping out all the people that are pushing the Sound Money legislation through the legislatures. And we got to go. We're got the signal 3 times already, but I'll be more than happy to talk over there about the Sound Money.
Come to our table. Our table's right out here. We'll all hang out there.
Thank you all. Thank you.